Brains in Motion with Mary McCone, Ed D, and Angela Zielinski, DPT. Please remember that this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. This is not medical advice, and this is just general discussion for educational purposes. Thank you. Enjoy. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Angela.
Welcome back to our second part of our academic learning and reflexes. We talked a lot about how reflexes play a role in freeing up brain space, is the way I feel like I learned a lot about making it easier to access those higher levels of the brain. And we didn't finish. So we are there's more to talk about. So today we're going to just jump right in.
Okay.
And do it. So we are going to start with Palmar and Robinson's hands grasp. And there's two names to it because we're learning that as you teach us, Mary. I love that you keep always learning and that you find research and specifics, that it just depends on what part of the literature you're looking in. And I think you found some more information about it. Is that right?
I did. So I always find it confusing when you go to one training and it's called one thing, and you go to a training with a different modality, it's called something else. So I was digging around in the research last week because, what else are you going to do at 7:00 on a Saturday night?
Nothing better,
Not to me anyway. So this is what I found in the research. Palmar is the original grasp of the infant. So you touch the infant's hand right below the fingers and they hold on to the finger. That is palmar grasp.
Okay.
Then palmar matures and our grasp goes through sequences. So in a brand new infant, the thumb is actually under the fingers. And then in a couple of days, the thumb comes out and it's next to the fingers. And then in like another week, it's in front of the fingers. And it progresses until about 18 months of age when we get to tripod.
Mm-hmm.
That whole sequence of maturation is Robinson's hands grasp. So Palmar found the original grasp. Robinson defined the sequence of events from what I read.
Gotcha. So that makes sense why it gets confusing, because it's both has to do with grasp, and it's this concept that we've been talking about a lot of moving from, quote, primitive to primary or maturing, and how you have to get to these next phases to integrate reflexes.
Right. So really, in essence, Palmar's the primitive aspect, and then Robinson's would be the maturation as we get into primary and go through the motor movements until full integration and maturation would be at the tripod grasp. Right.
Okay. So that's where we're looking for, so that helps with handwriting. Is that right? Like tripod grasp?
Right. Of course. 100%. Right. So how many parents listening have taken their kids to OT to work on their grasp because they're writing, they can't hold the pencil correctly. And I remember learning about grasp way back when I first started in brain gym 20 years ago, and the power grasp, and where the power grasp is basically where you hold the pen like an infant would hold mom's finger, just all the fingers around the pencil. And that's simply because they don't have a mature grasp. They can't get to pincer or tripod. So they're stabilizing, so they're compensating, right? So they can still find a way to do what's expected of them, but they don't have the postural control or the separation of the arm from the trunk or the fine motor control in the hands to be able to make that happen. So they compensate through a variety of physical posturing in the hand. So some of the things that we see when the grasp doesn't mature from an emotional standpoint, which I realize is slightly different than our topic, but it's so important, it's worth touching on, I think, is the emotional aspect of Palmar and Robinson's hands grasp, particularly Palmar, that for an infant, grasping onto mom is about safety. It's about safety. And so when palmar remains active, there is this feeling of a lack of safety. And we'll see higher anxiety when palmar is still in its primitive state. And we have these words, I think we mentioned this in another podcast. We have these words in our language, or these phrases, like if somebody's feeling overwhelmed, we tell them, you know what, just hang on. Or if they're losing it, we say, you know what, you got to get a grip. So we instinctually know that this has some importance to us emotionally. The physical aspect of it is being able to hold our own weight, like if we're hanging, which is also security, right? If we were holding on to somebody and we were slipping and they were holding on to us, we have to have a good grip for that. So that also has a safety element. And then in an academic setting, it's about being able to control our pencil basically and get things down on the page in a fluent manner so that we're not falling behind and then feeling anxious because we're falling behind and need extra time and have to take it home and things like that. So what are some of the things that we might see, Angela, if the grasp was immature? How might that affect a kid when they were trying to write in school?
Well, the first one listed is hand fatigue, and I have that. So, like, let me tell you, Mary, about
Tell me all about it.
if you're compensating or you're just trying to hang on. I'm an over gripper and put lots of pressure on the paper. So, like, I'm somebody who can write, and you could read it on 2 other pages underneath it for just like that excessive pressure of trying to compensate to just hold on and carry through as you're doing the task, and like as you're trying to follow directions and you're trying to get your thoughts down on paper. And so it's interesting when you said like the emotional piece. I think it's very tied to the academic, because if you are having trouble with grasp and you feel like you can't get it, like I can't get what you want down, I feel like there's a lot of emotions involved with that. And that just affects, I feel like it dominoes. If I can't get what I want down, or you can't understand me, I then get upset or frustrated. And then I have trouble with moving on to the next thing or hanging in there. Grasp, like you said, hanging in there.
Yeah, right.
And yeah.
One really interesting thing, because I was in the classroom for so long, and I taught high school, is the majority of my students had significant reading issues because I was a reading specialist. And whenever we would get to a writing task, which was every day, because I had them write every day, suddenly half the class would have to go to the bathroom. It caused them so much anxiety that their autonomic nervous system was, release all fluids and prepare to flee, right? So they immediately had to go to the bathroom to avoid. So that's another thing we see is task avoidance, because it may be painful. I had a retained grasp, oh gosh, probably into my 30s. And I remember being in middle school and like putting down my pen at the end of class, and my hand hurt so bad it was like radiating up to my face. And I was like, does everybody feel this? No, they don't, Mary. It was just some of us, but it really made it difficult. And I was a really good student. So it wasn't that I didn't have the cognitive ability, but I literally had a physical issue getting in the way of being able to fluidly and fluently express my ideas. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you also have difficulty with grasp, handwriting could have difficulty with like being legible, spacing, how big or small letters are. I feel like if I don't have lines on a paper, I tend to have some letters are capitalized, some are small, some are big. I don't have like a fluent size to my handwriting unless I have some supports.
And then one thing that I think is particularly interesting about Palmar particularly, but the whole sequence, is that where the movement is initiated in the sensory motor cortex, right? So if you thought about putting, for our listeners, if you thought about putting a headband on or a set of headphones um, over your head, kind of where that headband or the headphones go, that's kind of your sensory motor cortex. So where the movement is initiated for hands, which is a huge part of the motor cortex, by the way, like the hands take up a larger space than anything else on that motor cortex. That's how important they are to our existence. Right next to that is the lips and tongue and jaw. So I have found some very interesting research about the connection between palmar and speech articulation and expressive language. I have this kiddo I've been working with for about 2.5 years, level 3 autism, minimally verbal, when we met. And we just weren't seeing the kind of gains in expressive language I would expect from the amount of work we're doing. And so I circled back and I was like, you know what? I want to spend a little more time on the hands and feet. And so we came back and we've been doing all the sensory pieces, a lot of vibration, and he started speaking in sentences.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So we went from single words to phrases to sentences, and now there's some mild back and forth happening. And that's a new development just in the last month. So this idea, like, you know, in our culture, we isolate everything. Speech is that thing. And, you know, you got to go to PT for this and OT for this, but they're all connected. I don't think we can say that enough on this podcast. They're all connected. And who would have thought that your hands could be related to your language? And this idea that what I have read in research about the difference between typing and handwriting, like when we handwrite, we activate those parts of the brain, right? But when we type, we do not. There is something about the actual formation of letters and about moving the pen across the page that activates in a way that typing does not.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
How grasp helps with bilateral coordination and crossing midline.
So when grasp remains active, like if you activate grasp on one side, if it's in a primitive state, you'll see the other hand move. I call this extraneous movement, but it's one thing I always look for when I see kids in person and when I watch the videos people send me is, if I touch this foot, does that foot move? Or if I touch that hand, does a foot move? Like, what's going on in the extraneous movement? Because they're connected. And so in its primitive state, one hand moves, the other hand moves also. And oftentimes the plantar grasp goes also because they're so connected. So that makes it difficult because and then you layer an 18R on that, right? And the bilateral issues that we've discussed at length about 18R. But this creates issues with body awareness, and it prevents the brain from differentiating between the two hands. Now, we don't write with both hands, right? We have to have hand dominance. So this will impact hand dominance, which should be established by the age of 6. So we have our kids writing far too young in the United States, FYI, hand dominance. You know, we sit them down at 3 and 4 and expect them to have hand dominance, and developmentally that shouldn't necessarily happen till the age of 6. But this then also affects like directionality of their writing, and it can affect reading and writing and lead to confusion and reversals. Letter reversals can be tied to this as well. So it can have a really big impact on academic learning, far beyond just what we think about, like how they're writing their name or filling out their papers at school.
Yeah. And the overflow piece, I look at that a lot with gait, and are they using their hands to help stabilize for things like walking on a balance beam or heel walking? And that's how we see a lot of what's the body doing to compensate. And it makes me think of, if you have that overflow and you're writing, your foot might be moving, or you might need to wiggle, or you might have to move, or your tongue is coming out. And so you're doing all these compensations just to get out what you're thinking. And that just takes a lot of energy. And so that fatigue piece that we talk about a lot is like if you get so tired that you get exhausted by the end of the day, or you might have a short window of being able to do well, and then that collapse can happen, or your frustration increases, and that then just affects the rest of the day learning. So it kind of just depends on how much endurance you have.
You want to hear this fun thought that I just had? Like literally just now. Well, I've always been taught, I know you have too, that if you move your hand and your mouth moves, that it's always Babkin. But I have tested so many kids, no Babkin. What if it's not always Babkin? I'm just wondering, because it's what I do. What if it's because of the proximity on the motor cortex of the hands and the mouth and the immaturity of those reflexes that when you trigger one, the other one is also getting fired? Ooh.
I say, ooh, I believe you. It sounds good. The people I meet always have an active Babkin too, so I can't. But that's right. I mean, yeah.
But most of the kids that I have assessed did not have an active Babkin.
That's so interesting.
But when they write, their mouth will move, but the tongue particularly will come out. And I'm just like, well, I know the tongue is involved in the vestibular system too.
And posture. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Because when one of my kiddos, who shall remain nameless so that they don't disown me, was little and they were at gymnastics, whenever they'd be on the balance beam, their tongue would always be out trying to balance themselves. And I just thought, well, this was a long time ago before I knew all the things I know today. So anyways, that's just a wondering. I don't have any research to back that up yet. But
but wait for Mary to come back in a future episode with three papers on how so this uploading for future thoughts. I like it.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, what did I text you the other day that I found?
Oh, see, this is fun. This is why Mary makes things interesting. She texted me that she found in the literature that grasp helps integrate Moro. And my first thought was, yeah, that makes sense. But do you want to share more, Mary?
Well, it was kind of like a note and a bigger study, like, oh, it's been well established that palmar helps integrate Moro. And I was like, what is that little piece of information? And the study it was referencing was from the early 60s, and I can't access the original study without paying $50. And I was like, oh. So, yeah, I know, I hate that. Even though I pay for a subscription, I guess that one was outside because of the age of the study. But as I was thinking through it and the hierarchy of how reflexes develop and the safety aspect, and then how the sensory aspect of palmar helps stimulate the brainstem, right, and develop the brainstem, and that's where Moro is initiated. That made a lot of sense to me. Safety, security. Okay, the brain's like, oh, I'm okay. I can hold on, and I'm not gonna fall. And one of the things that was discussed in this larger study was about how primates hold on to mom. Moments after birth, they hold on with hands and feet, and that they also have a Moro reflex. If they start to fall back, that they will also go into the Moro extension. And so there was some discussion about like the holding on and the safety that provided when that activated. Anyways, it was fascinating.
Yeah, that sounds so interesting. Yeah. I was thinking it from the point of I've been recently seeing active grasp through play, and I've been seeing an improvement in postural control with that. And so our discussion of how Moro tends to integrate once you, again, feel safe and secure, and as your posture tends to improve. So that's the lens that's why I was thinking, yeah, checks. Like, it's so cool.
Well, and with all reflexes, there's this big proprioceptive aspect, right? Whenever we use our muscles, we're activating proprioceptors and our joints. So, like, I do lots of sensory stuff on the hand, more than most people probably, but that's sending all of that information up into the cerebellum where the proprioceptive neurons are, which are right next to the vestibular neurons, right? And vestibular and proprioceptive is what gives us postural control. So that also makes sense if you look at it that way. So I'm not saying, for clarification, that Palmer integrates Moro. I did not say that. What I'm saying is I read something that was interesting, that Palmer could be involved as one of the things that help Moro integrate. And in the timeline of infant development, it also makes sense to me when Moro should disappear and when their grasp begins to mature. So it could
Oh,
be
yeah.
right? It provides a piece of a larger puzzle, I think. Yeah.
So cool, which is why it's so cool that Mary shares this with all of us. And we will stay tuned for future developments on how the hand and the tongue are related outside of Babkin. And then, so that's amazing. So we've talked a lot about hands. We've talked a lot about postural control. And then the last reflex I wanted to touch on was just talking about how bauer crawling is this super cool reflex that shows coordination, it shows integration, because in order to bauer crawl with a fluid pattern, you have to be integrated on both sides. You have to be able to cross midline. You have to put all of these reflexes, these smaller reflexes together to be able to achieve bauer crawling, which to me means if you are working on bauer crawling and all these cross-lateral activities, it's helping with academics because that fluid motion is going to carry over into those cognitive processes.
100%, because bauer crawling establishes for the first time contralateral communication in the brain. That's the first time a contralateral pattern emerges in the infant. Well, that means corpus callosum, right? That's the white matter that runs across the center of your brain. So everything that we do, except for balance, the vestibular system is ipsilateral or one-sided, but everything else is contralateral. So I see in the right eye, but it's processed in the left visual cortex. I hear in the left ear, but it's processed in the right temporal lobe. Everything has to cross midline. So we have two sides to our thalamus, right? Like everything is or most things are two-sided. So we have to be able to cross midline in order for brain communication to be efficient, which then also means visual and auditory processing will be impaired if we cannot cross midline well, which is one of the ways we talked about that ATNR and STNR are also involved. But that starts with STNR will not emerge correctly if bauer crawling was not fulfilled, right? So you see the interconnectedness for our listeners between these reflexes. Bauer crawling is also involved in developing the circuits in the cerebellum, which is right at the base of the brain, for timing, reading, and oral language are dependent on timing. The basis of reading is oral language, and coordinated motor movement also requires timing. And that is really escalated through bauer crawling and then hand-eye coordination, right? So when babies are crawling around, belly crawling, and they're starting to reach out for things that they see and belly crawling to them and grabbing them, now we have hand-eye coordination. A little different than like when they were rolling around, like with ATNR, and they'd see something and they'd turn their head and then they'd use their little spinal collant to roll on over, grab it. Now we have something in front of us or to the side, and we're trying to get to it through motor movement as opposed to just rolling.
I think of it too as like that's when problem solving really shows up, and kids are so smart.
Yes.
How do I get to that thing that I can see? And as soon as you turn your back and you turn back, you're like, how did you get there? And they're like, haha, if you only knew. All of that,
yes,
I feel like is like foundational for school. Is like if you don't learn to problem solve or don't learn how to get to where you're going, it makes it hard to to do the academic parts.
Absolutely. So I don't remember if it was the last podcast or the one before that. I mentioned that in some circles, bauer crawling is referred to as amphibian.
Oh, yes. I forgot about
And
that.
so my understanding, and I've done limited reading on this, but I know in the UK it's referred to as amphibian primarily. But that bauer crawling matures and becomes the adult amphibian reflex. And that's the reflex that's a lifetime reflex. Like if I needed to crawl out of a burning building or I was injured and I needed to crawl away from danger, that it's the amphibian reflex because bauer integrated. But again, is it because somebody else discovered? I'm not sure. But if you're listening and you're like, well, isn't that the amphibian reflex? Mostly, I think is my answer right now. But stay tuned. I think the last reflex we want to talk about was head writing.
Head writing. And so as a posture control reflex, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And a lifelong reflex, head writing? Question mark.
Yes. The writing reflexes are lifelong because they're supposed to keep us from falling over, right? So if you start to move positions, like if I was going to lean to the left, my head would write in the opposite direction so that I don't just fall over. And I know you mentioned in another episode that if the head goes with the body, spinal galant is probably active, right? And that makes sense. Babies don't have head writing in that stage of their development on the floor yet because they haven't gotten upright, so they don't need it, right? So, so head writing is so involved in our vision system because if it remains inactive, it hasn't clicked on and it's not doing its job, then we can't keep our head stable. And this affects our VOR, vestibular ocular reflex, right? So the vestibular system, housed in our middle ear, but the neurons are in the cerebellum, should read that we're changing position and activate the writing. So head writing really is a vestibular issue. Like we're not getting the right information to write the head, so it doesn't click on correctly. Generally, I have found, at least in my practice, when I address vestibular, head writing will come on by itself. Not always, though. I see you thinking. And then the other thing that I have found really impacts head writing is if there's a subluxation at C1, C2, C3 in the neck. And so if I've been working with a kid for a while and we've addressed vestibular, we've gone through postural reflexes, still can't get head writing on, usually if I send them to a pediatric chiropractor, they'll be like, oh yeah, they have a subluxation at C1, C3. Okay, so if head writing is immature or poorly developed in a school setting, what that might look like is that you might struggle listening to the teacher. They might have poor handwriting and motor planning. They have trouble tracking words on the page without skipping lines. It's a common one in reading challenges and dyslexia. What else?
It's interesting. You have the line skipping, and I associated that with ATNR. But when you said I address vestibular and then improve ATNR or improve head writing, what I was thinking was what I see often is that littles compensate their head writing with ATNR. So sometimes it doesn't improve until you address ATNR because it's so overpowering. And so that's an interesting piece with like the line skipping, like tracking, like the visual tracking piece with head writing. I didn't know that. So that's an interesting piece.
Well, if your head's not stable, right, and your vision, your eyes aren't stable then because of that vestibular ocular reflex, then I can't fixate on the line. And so I'll drop lines. There's an assessment I used to give, the test of silent word reading fluency. And I love that test. I really gave it not for the reading fluency, but to see what their vision system was doing. So basically, if you're not familiar with this test world out there, it's a page full of words in lines, and the words have been squished together, so there's no spaces between them.
Hmm.
And the kids have to start at the left of the top line and go across and draw a slash between each word that they see. And it's timed for 3 minutes. It's fascinating because you can see things with line skipping. Like sometimes kids would just skip 3 or 4 lines. I gave it to a kid once and they skipped midline on every single line. So when I took the paper back, straight down the middle of the page was they hadn't marked anything. Their eyes just
Oh,
jumped midline completely. Yeah.
that would make so many things hard. What a great test.
Yeah. And then if they consistently put the line like on the letter instead of next to the letter, that's
Mhm.
visual fixation. So my eyes cannot hold that size print in focus long enough. They can't fixate on it. So not quite, I think I'm putting it. I mean, the older I get, I feel like this a lot. Like, what does that say? Using my phone magnifier to, yeah, that's not a great stage to be at, but here we are. Um, but I, but I think about our kids and how much they struggle with that, right? And I use that as one of the entry assessments for the school where I was the assistant head of school for dyslexia. And 90% of the time, there were difficulties on that test. So there's a lot that goes into reading from these reflexes, and you have to read all day to be successful in school. You
Wow.
want to talk about working memory and attention?
I do. Tell
Okay.
me about working. I want to learn more. Yes, please.
She always punts to me. Eventually, I'm going to get her talking. All right. It's okay. It's good. It's the relationship that we have. So we've talked about this a lot, but when postural reflexes are strong, sitting upright and keeping the eye steady is mostly automatic, right? So what that means then is that our operating system, this is the metaphor I always use or the analogy, is that the things that are supposed to be happening in the background, like the operating system on our computer, are doing their job. I can sit still. I can hold myself up. I can look at things. I can move from the board to my paper. I can listen to my teacher. All that's happening without extra effort. So then that frees up my cognitive processes for working memory and attention. Besides the neural connections, right, that are made that allow us to access the prefrontal cortex, because attention and working memory are both executive functioning. So if our postural control is weak, what might that look like for a kiddo, Angela, in a classroom if their postural control was weak?
Leaning to the side, slumped over, trying to like engage on everything on the chair, but also difficulty with like listening, paying attention, like orienting. I feel like that concept of orienting, being able to, I'd have to turn my whole body versus just turning my head. And like school is a lot of switching attention. And if I don't have the postural control, I can't switch that without like whole body movements.
Yes. Yeah. And then the sheer mental fatigue, right? That's something that is commented on all the time. You know, when we would do our tours and stuff at the school and parents would be like, they're just so exhausted at the end of the day. And I'm like, yeah, because it's not just the academics that are being asked to do that are hard for them. It's the actually keeping their body upright and being able to attend and putting so much effort into being good, right? And not doing the things they're not supposed to do and staying in their seat and listening and completing things. It's exhausting. And so they come home and then they just kind of bleh on you because you're their safe person and they're exhausted. It's their tank is empty is the way that we would describe that. And like you said, we have shorter attention span because I can only pay attention for so long when I'm having to also pay attention to my body. And what do kids get if they're slumping in their chairs or they're sitting funny? It's like, turn around, sit right in your chair, sit up. You're not getting, no sleeping in my class. Remember, I was a high school teacher. But, sometimes I would even have admin walk into my classroom. Not, 70% of my kids were on IEPs, but they would see a kid with poor posture and they'd be like, sit up. And I'm like, oh man, like, stop doing that. There was a few conversations like that. Like, I've got it. It's okay. They're learning. Oh, they need to sit up and show respect. No, this isn't about respect. So if you're an educator and you're listening to us, I would ask that you notice what's happening without judgment. Like, oh, I see that that kid always has to lay down on their arm when they're writing or reading. I wonder what that's about. I noticed that they have to do this. I wonder what that's about. So noticing and then questioning, as opposed to saying, well, they're just not sleeping well. They're always tired. That's why they're laying down, or they're being disrespectful, or they're disengaged. That's a big thing. Like admin come into classes and they want to see everybody sitting up, and because that shows engagement. But what if the kid doesn't have the postural control to do that? That doesn't mean they're not really trying. And I will say that I did have lots of high schoolers fall asleep, but that's a different issue altogether. But, you know, I guess the last thing I would say is when we're spending all that time on the postural aspects and the focusing and I'm, trying to see things clearly, we have reduced capacity for complex tasks like reading comprehension and math reasoning, like math problem solving, and writing, like writing composition is such a complex task and so taxing on working memory, right? If I've used this analogy in our podcast before, I apologize, but I'm going to repeat it. So think of writing as you're making a batch of cookies. Put all the ingredients on the counter to make your cookies, right? So I need my flour and my sugar and my brown sugar and my chocolate chips and my vanilla and my baking soda. And like, I need to have everything out, eggs. What happens if my countertop is not big enough to get all my ingredients on there? My cookies are not going to come out correctly because something has fallen off. So I think of working memory as the countertop. So when we are engaged in a writing task, say that I'm writing 3 paragraphs about a character in the story that I read, I have to remember the content. What am I going to write about? I have to remember organization. I have to remember idea development. I have to remember format. I have to remember punctuation, capitalization, spelling, word choice, which is vocabulary, fluency, citation format, because if I'm going to cite where I got the information from, which starts in 3rd grade now, that's a lot that has to come on the table.
Yeah.
So, yeah, right. So when parents say, well, they're just not paying attention, or I just need them to, their writing is really poor. Okay, well, we have to back up. That's not the problem. That's the manifestation of the problem. Academic performance is at the very top of the pyramid or the top of the staircase that I kind of reframe that pyramid up all the way at the top. So when there's issues with academic performance, you have to go down the staircase until you find the lowest point of deficit and work yourself back up.
Yeah.
All the intervention academically in the world doesn't resolve the fact that a kid has poor postural control.
Yeah, it makes me think of too, linking it to other episodes of, okay, if I have a counter and I've got limited space and I'm supposed to be focusing on writing and I'm baking cookies, so the writing is my cooking ingredients,
Yes.
and the counter has limited space, but then what if the counter has like sensory information on it? And what if the counter is getting full with all this extraneous things, so then you don't even have room for the ingredients? And so then you're kind of like trying to filter what ingredients do I need and how do I fit it all on the counter? And that can be a challenge too. So that's I like that analogy of, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, you're making cookies and then your 2-year-old comes in and they're tugging on your leg, and then, your best friend calls you on the cell phone and somebody rings the doorbell, and like you're like, oh, I can't pay attention to all those things at the same time, and you forget an ingredient.
Mm-hmm.
In case you don't know this about me, I love cooking and baking shows. It's kind of an obsession. I'm just saying, I'm definitely a foodie, and it's really terrible when you're at that really high level of like Top Chef kind of cooking, and or like the ultimate baking championship, and they're like, I forgot my baking soda. Like, how did I forget this key ingredient, or chopped, they left out a basket ingredient. That's kind of what I think of it when we think about that. The working memory is like, you left out a basket ingredient. Yeah, please pack your knives and go. Yeah.
To me, it's like wild concept, right? That we're talking about postural control, and we're talking about sensory processing, and then we're talking about academic learning, right? Like all of these pieces fit together, and they make sense when you talk about it, and it makes sense when you look at it from this reflex perspective, because one thing is linked to another.
Mm-hmm.
But like you've talked about before, we want these things to exist in isolation. Like we want just learning to be here, and we want just movement to be here, and we want sensory to be over there, and it's just not. And we need all of our systems to work together to be successful in all areas. All the things are connected, and different things can help with academic learning besides just more writing and more reading. I don't know. Yeah.
Right. Or the interventions and lots of kids get school-based OT, and which can be very helpful. There's some great school-based OTs out there. But you have to remember that school-based services are for educational benefit only. So they don't look at developing postural control to completion. It's about, are they managing in the school environment? Right? And with all the demands on budgets right now, like in Oregon, they're closing schools like crazy right now because of, $52 million budget deficits in a state where education is already underfunded. So they're pulling back services just because they have to. They've been told this is what's going to happen. We want more than managing for our kids. We want more than survival. I want kids to thrive. I want school to not be challenging for them. I want them to be able to demonstrate their full potential. And when we're just doing enough, I'm not criticizing school-based OTs, by the way. This is a systemic and institutional problem. So if you're listening, please don't think I'm criticizing you, because I am not. I fully understand the institution and the economic limitations that you were given. I'm just using this as an example of if a child's vestibular and proprioception is underdeveloped, it's pervasive and will affect all areas of their life. So it is something that needs to be addressed through our work and through getting the right professionals involved.
Yeah.
Okay.
And while all of these things are, to me, easiest seen in infancy, because that's when they're first supposed to be happening, and it's easiest to address, like the earlier the window, it doesn't mean it has to be in infancy. You can make changes at any age, right, Mary?
Oh, absolutely. And,
even as an adult. Sorry. Even as an adult.
Well, yes, because we both did it.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, we're living proof that you can, in fact, do that. So, but what you just said about infancy is so important, because if we're looking for red flag patterns, go back to infancy. What would be some of the things that you would see in infancy, since that's your specialty, that might be like, oh, that's probably something related that's going to result in postural difficulties. What would you see?
Asymmetrical crawling is one that shows up most often, where one leg stays straight or has difficulty tucking under, or kids that just skip crawling, or they go straight from rolling to hands and knees and they skip belly crawling, or kids that butt scoot, or kids that just problem solve rolling to getting to the edge of the couch to then pulling themselves up. And so skipping those cross-lateral patterns is one of the big things that can lead to challenges later. So I'm a big advocate for helping kids get that pattern, whether they're able to get that pattern immediately and in infancy, or if we have to go back and help them get that pattern as they progress. But the earlier is the easiest.
100%, yes. If you can work with a kid when they're 6 months old and get bauer crawling established, then most likely everything after that will continue the way it was supposed to, although it might need a little tweaking. What might you see in like the first few months of life that would be like, aha, there's something going on there?
Difficulty latching, like rooting reflex, or head preference, like only turning one direction is a head preference, tells me things are that one side's a little bit different than the other, and being able not making those connections. The other one is everybody talks about it a lot, and it's a thing, but being able to be on your tummy comfortably and engage in short periods of time of play and exploring that relationship of my hands are on the ground and my head is moving is one of the biggest things that kids can do to be successful, because if you don't establish that relationship of gravity in the ground, it can be very hard to then establish a relationship with postural control and finding your midline and finding upright. But I know it's challenging.
But a lot of the kids that I worked with that's on my questionnaire hated tummy time and screamed like a crazy baby when they were put on their bellies, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a common red flag, yeah.
It is. And I would like to say that I have seen reflex integration help those babies in real time be more comfortable on their tummies. So
yeah,
it's possible. It is possible. And it's okay if, they hated tummy time and we get it in a different way, but it is it is a flag of, it's one that you want to look for support and seek services if they're avoiding tummy time, and that's a big challenge. That's what I would.
Yeah. I have a kiddo that he's older, about 8, global developmental delay caused by a rare genetic condition. Hated tummy time, never laid on his tummy, avoided it like the plague. And then a couple of months ago, we've been working together about a year now. And a couple months ago, she was like, so he just spontaneously started laying on the floor to read his books on his tummy. So he's gone back, and we've been able to establish that pattern because we did spinal parez, spinal gallant trunk extension. And now he's like, oh, this isn't so bad. How about that? So that's one of his favorite positions now.
That's great.
So
that's so great. Yes.
You can go back and recoup that. Just because you passed it and it was terrible doesn't mean that it is gone forever. You can go back and establish that pattern because you need it for the patterns that come after it. Yeah. From an academic viewpoint, if we're talking about like red flag patterns, if I'm a classroom teacher and I'm looking for red flags about, okay, what could be getting in the way of their academic learning, I would say things like in their reading, are they frequently line skipping, like they're dropping lines, right? Losing their place, fatiguing in reading, avoiding it altogether, and failure to respond to reading intervention is a big one, right? We've done the appropriate scientific interventions based on the science of reading. I can't emphasize that enough. Not just more of it, but targeted intervention based on diagnostics, and they're not responding. That's a big clue. If kids avoid reading, kids generally love to read. It's actually, there's been quite a few studies about the social status that comes in school from being a good reader. So when kids avoid reading, that's always like that something's going on there. In writing, I know we mentioned this already briefly, poor spacing, inconsistent letter size, the death grip on the pencil, tension in the mouth when they're writing, or the tongue coming out when they're writing, and then fatiguing very quickly would be things. What about like math and attention? What do you think we might see there, Angela?
Well, it looks like we might have difficulty aligning columns, reading the word problems, and organizing work on the page. Ooh, Mary, I just feel called out in this these episodes. Sometimes I'm like, aren't these normal? Just kidding. It's okay. It's out loud. But you said organizing work on a page. Oh, man, that was something I got talked to often. I've learned how to do it now. But if it's my choice, it is not going to be, it looks like chaos. I understand it, but nobody could follow it. Like, that's interesting.
And just in case you didn't remember this, Angela does have a doctorate. She's
she does, but I haven't. Like, I'll tell you how it works. Like, this is
she has been academically successful at the highest level, but I appreciate that you're also willing to share. Like, yeah, this was really difficult for me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say and learn, right? Like, so
yeah.
The note here that sorry to skip, but like,
yeah,
a mismatch between like intelligence and performance. I think that's a key of like, kids learn how to compensate and nervous systems learn how to compensate sometimes. And if there's a mismatch between that, looking into reflex integration can be helpful.
In education, that's called a discrepancy between ability and achievement. Yeah. That is the basis, although they say that they're not supposed to use that anymore, that is the basis for which kids are qualified for IEPs. Is there a discrepancy between their ability when they do cognitive testing and their achievement? The other issue is that if ability and achievement are identical and they're both below average, so like say that a kid all their cognitive scores are in the 70s and their achievement scores are in the 70s, the school will say, well, they're not qualified for special ed because they're learning at their ability. What that tells me is that we have a ton of things to work on as that we have a lot of inactivity in certain regions of the brain. It just hasn't been woken up, so to speak. Yeah. I find cognitive scores to be fascinating. They give you a lot of information if you look at them correctly. And then other clues that you might see as an educator would be kids that are always like, wait, what did you say? What are we doing? Not really being able to track what the conversation in class and that's just about like the auditory attention, which is another executive functioning skill, right? If I'm using all my energy to keep myself upright and control my body, I won't have the auditory attention to track what's going on.
How can we use this information in like school context of schools? So we talk a lot about reflex integration and how we do it individualized and how we incorporate sensory and we incorporate touch and we incorporate movement patterns in a very specific way. But at school, there's limitations like we've talked about, like you're in an academic setting. So what are some things that could be helpful in a school-based setting, Mary?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the work that we do is hands-on. So that's a little challenging, right? Because, as an educator, you can't put your hands on kids. So, and that's for your safety and theirs. So what I used in my classroom, honestly, was Brain Gym for Educators, that book is still available. Those are cross crawls, lazy eights, double doodles. There's, I think, about 26 different exercises that you can do in class. I used to do those with my high school students. I'd have them for 2 hours for reading and language arts. We do those for about, 40 minutes a day, just the Brain Gym activities before we transition into our coursework. And that's how we started seeing really strong results in reading. That's how I got into this work, as I've mentioned before. But I have a good story about that. I had this kid, I had her for 2 years for 2 hours a day. And she came in reading at the first grade level, high-risk student, lots of trauma in her background. That kid could not cross midline to save her soul. I mean, oh, man. We would get up and I would give them big chart paper and I would have them draw a big infinity sign in Lazy 8 and Brain Gym, a big infinity sign. When she drew hers for me the first time, it looked like a kidney bean vertically.
Mm-hmm.
She could not draw it on its side, and she could not cross the center. She couldn't even look at an X. X is a big thing in Brain Gym. It's about integration. She could not even physically look at an X. It made her want to throw up. We worked on cross crawls and double doodles and lazy eights for a year until she was able to cross midline. And I will never forget the day I was standing behind her, kind of doing hand over hand with her to help her cross midline. And we got to the center and she went across it and she turned around and she went, I did it. Yeah. I mean, that kid was profoundly, profoundly dyslexic. And I think in 2 years, I got her to about a fifth grade level, which is about where that was about the extent of what I was able to do in a school environment where I had, 25 kids in the class. But I feel like zero, nothing to 5th grade in 2 years was pretty good for her.
Yeah, it's incredible.
But it took us a year to get her to be able to cross midline. Now, if I was able to work with her outside of school now, that would have taken, 4 or 5 months probably. But there we are in the limitation. So I think Brain Gym for Educators is great. There's other programs like reflex integration through play that she's a school-based OT or was. I think that's a great idea for teachers. Harklet even has some stuff that would be good for school-based stuff. The work that we do is very, very in-depth, but when you're in school, you're looking for activities that are hands-off that will help facilitate the integration of reflexes and promote self-regulation, right? And improve vestibular. Like I had balance boards in my classroom and we hopped on one foot and, we did all kinds of things to help with those things that were hands-off as well. I know RMTI has a school readiness class. Those are RMT exercises for the classroom. And then MNRI also has a school readiness class. So I know that there's lots of tools available out there. It is one of my grand goals is to create a movement program for teachers based on the things that we know, but put it on the list. It's on my whiteboard, but please stay tuned. I got a lot of things on that whiteboard, but given my background, it's something that's very meaningful to me. So
the one that I like is Balavizex is a good.
Oh yeah, I totally forgot about Balavizex. Yeah,
but I think school it has to be accessible, it has to be fun, and it has to be something that is relatively quick and easy. So I think of it as like supportive things. It's not treatment, and it's not going to be the be-all, end-all, but it's definitely supportive and can help kids keep moving forwards and progressing. And accessibility, I feel like, is one of the biggest challenges in reflex integration, and which is why we, again, do the podcast of like talking about it and trying to make it to where people can use these pieces in real time because it is helpful. And we talk, and like so many kids and parents can probably, and educators are relating to this, and they're like, great, so reflexes play a role, but like, how do I help? And it's just small things. Movement, to me, especially as a PT, I'm biased, is so underutilized, and specific movement can be so much more helpful than you realize. So
yeah, I want to stress the specific movement. So
yeah.
I think that movement breaks are awesome, and I think Go Noodle is awesome. So I'm not speaking badly about Go Noodle. That's what used widely. But specific movement is different than just movement. So if we get up and wiggle our bodies to let out the energy because we've been sitting too long, great. We have a little dance party or play freeze dance. That's great. But that's not going to integrate anything or spur neurodevelopment. That's just to help kids get off their energy so they can focus again. So there is a difference between doing some movement stuff and then doing targeted movement stuff. So that's my little caveat there. But I think we've come to the end of our topic for today. Yeah?
Yeah, I think so. I think that we covered a lot. If you have questions or comments or things you would like us to talk about again, leave us a comment, shoot us an email, let us know.
And I just wanted to mention to our listeners, I did a 90-minute question and answer session a couple weeks ago. That recording is up on my website for free, so you can listen to that. People submitted their questions in advance. I thought it went pretty darn well. And then I'm doing my first 4-hour webinar in August, so you can sign up for that. That one is a fee. It's only $24.95. I'm really trying to keep it reasonable and accessible. 4 hours. This is not a how. So this is not this is how you test and integrate reflexes. This is really the what and the why. and looking at the neurodevelopment. So what part of the brains are we affecting when we do this work, and why is it so important to the things that you're probably seeing in their lives, which I think is missing in a lot of trainings, is like, okay, I get that we're integrating reflexes, but how does that affect the brain development, and what would that manifest as? So that's going to be a big piece of this. So it's 4.5 hours. We're going to take a 30-minute break in the middle. It'll be on Pacific time. But if you register and you can't attend, I will, of course, send you the recording so you don't have to be present in order to participate. So that's my little spot there.
I like it. No, I appreciate it. And I think it's great because I think that it's super helpful with how to talk about reflexes, and like it's just another lens. And the more you learn about it, the more I feel like you can use it because you can connect it in different ways. So thanks for doing the training, Mary. No, I'm excited for ours because the question and answer was great. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time. You can email us at brainsinmotionpodcast@gmail.com. You can find Mary at her website, brain-works.org, or on Facebook with her Facebook Reflex Integration groups. If you would like that information, please check our show notes. And you can find Angela at angelapt.com or rainbowdragonbooks.com. Thanks for listening.